There's a walkout tunnel at Old Trafford that Marcus Rashford has known since he was 11 years old. He's walked through it as a boy on an academy tour. He's walked through it as a teenager who scored on his senior debut without ever having started a game before in his life. He's walked through it as a Champions League goalscorer, as England's number 9, as a millionaire, as a headline, as a hero, and for 18 long months as a name nobody at the club wanted to say out loud. And now, in the summer of 2026, he's about to walk through it again. This is the story of how Marcus Rashford lost Manchester United, how he tried to find himself somewhere else, and why against almost every expectation he's back. To understand why this return matters, you have to go back to the moment everything cracked. December 2024, Manchester United are playing Manchester City in the derby. It's the kind of fixture Rashford grew up dreaming about, a boy from Wythenshawe, a few miles from the stadium, given the responsibility of carrying his home club against their biggest rival. But he isn't in the squad. He isn't even on the bench. Head coach Amorim leaves him out entirely and afterwards delivers a line that would follow Rashford for the next year and a half, that he doesn't give the maximum every day. It's a brutal public verdict from the man now in charge of his career, and it lands at the worst possible time. Rashford had already been through a turbulent period, disciplinary issues, a night out in Belfast that made front pages instead of back pages, question marks over his focus and fitness. Amorim's comments weren't made in a vacuum. They were the culmination of a manager who had watched enough and decided he'd seen all he needed to see. United go on to beat City 2-1 without him. The team moves on. Rashford does not. He returns to the matchday squad before the year is out, gets some minutes here and there, even finds the net once or twice in cup competition, but the trust is gone. By January, he's frozen out, completely training away from the first team, dubbed by the British press as part of United's so-called bomb squad, a group of players deemed surplus to Amorim's plans and essentially told to find a new club. Alongside him in that group, Jadon Sancho, Antony, Christian Eriksen, a snapshot of a rebuild that had no room left for its former talisman. For a player who had spent his entire adult life inside the walls of Carrington and Old Trafford, this was uncharted territory. Rashford wasn't just being dropped. He was being told, as clearly as a football club can tell a player, that his story there was finished. So he left. In January 2025, Rashford joined Aston Villa on loan, a short-term stop designed to simply get him playing football again. It did the job, in fragments some sharp performances, a reminder of the pace and directness that made him a Euro record signing in the eyes of English football a decade earlier, but it was never going to be his long-term home. Villa didn't pursue a permanent deal. The loan was a bridge, not a destination. The real reinvention came that summer, when Rashford signed for Barcelona on a season-long loan. For a player who had spent his whole life associated with one club, one city, one badge, this was the first time he had ever really left. New league, new language, new manager in Hansi Flick, a coach with a reputation for extracting the best from wide forwards through intensity and structure rather than star treatment. And it worked more than most people in England expected it to. Rashford adapted. He found space in a front line that demanded intelligent movement rather than just raw pace. He looked for long stretches of the season like a player who had rediscovered his hunger. Barcelona fans who had greeted his arrival with skepticism started to see what Manchester United supporters remembered from 2019 and 2020, a forward who could turn a half chance into a goal out of nothing. It mattered for more than his club form too. Rashford's season in Spain became the platform that carried him back into an England shirt with real conviction, and by the summer of 2026 he was a genuine contributor to England's run to the World Cup semi-finals, proof, if anyone still needed it, that his career wasn't finished. It had simply moved abroad while it waited for someone to decide what came next. That decision was never really going to be Rashford's alone to make. Here's where the story gets interesting, because this wasn't a simple case of a player earning his way back through outstanding form. This was a market moving in a way nobody fully predicted. Barcelona had a buy option in Rashford's loan deal, reported at around £26 million a fee that, for a player of his World Cup pedigree, looked almost like a bargain. Everyone assumed the option would be triggered. Instead, Barcelona chose not to activate it. Their spending priorities shifted elsewhere in the market, toward Newcastle's Anthony Gordon and Borussia Dortmund's Karim Adeyemi, leaving Rashford's future suddenly, awkwardly open again. Then came a second twist. Rashford's contract at Manchester United carried a release clause worth around £40 million, available to any club willing to pay it with one specific carve-out. It couldn't be triggered by Liverpool or Manchester City. It was United, in other words, protecting themselves from watching their academy graduate walk straight into the hands of a direct rival. But even with that release clause sitting there, available to half of Europe, no club came forward to activate it either. 2 exits closed in the same summer, and that left only one door still open, the one back to Manchester. It's worth pausing on how strange that is. A year and a half earlier, Rashford had been told by his own manager, in public, that he wasn't good enough in attitude to be trusted. Now, with no other club willing to make the move, Manchester United was suddenly his most realistic, maybe his only realistic path back into regular first-team football at the level he'd shown at the World Cup. For United, though, the calculation had changed too. Amorim, the manager who exiled him, was gone, replaced by Michael Carrick, a coach with his own relationship to Old Trafford as a former player, and crucially, no history of public conflict with Rashford. A new manager doesn't inherit old grudges. He inherits a squad and a job to do, and Carrick, taking charge of a rebuild that still needed pace, directness, and proven end product out wide, had far less reason to keep the door closed than his predecessor did. So in the first week of pre-season, after 3 weeks of post-World Cup holiday, Marcus Rashford flew back to United's training camp in the Republic of Ireland. He wasn't alone. Kobbie Mainoo and Lissandro, United's other World Cup semi-finalists, returned in the same window, all three walking back into Carrington on the same short list of players whose international summer had run long. There was no grand unveiling, no reintroduction press conference, just training, boots on grass, a number 9 shirt provisional. The club were quick to clarify, not a symbolic passing of the torch, simply the shirt that happened to be free. His first real test came away from Old Trafford, in Wrocław, Poland, in a pre-season friendly against a familiar face, AC Milan, now managed by Amorim himself. If you were writing this as fiction, nobody would believe the scheduling. The manager who ended Rashford's United career on the opposite touchline for what was effectively Rashford's first appearance back in the shirt in over a year and a half. He came on for the final half hour. It wasn't a fairy tale return, no. Dramatic goal, no scripted redemption moment, but it didn't need to be. The story was never really about that 90 minutes. It was about the fact that he was on the pitch, in red at all. What's followed since has been quieter and in some ways more telling. Instead of distancing himself, Rashford has leaned into it. He posted to Instagram for the first time since his return 6 photos from his first days back in training. Captioned simply, "First few days back." No statement, no explanation of the last 18 months. Just a quiet marker that a new chapter had begun. Maybe the most important reaction hasn't come from Rashford at all. It's come from the players already inside that dressing room, the ones who will decide day to day whether this reunion actually works. Harry Maguire, one of the senior voices left over from United's previous era, has been vocal about wanting Rashford to stay for the season, calling him a genuine threat and pointing 2 years of experience playing alongside him in training and in matches as reason enough to believe he can still be a major asset. That's not nothing. Dressing rooms can quietly reject players they've decided not to trust again. This one, by every public signal, hasn't. It matters too that Rashford isn't walking back into a settled Finnish squad, and Rhys Santos and Youri Tielemans have started to build an understanding in midfield during pre-season. New faces have arrived across the squad over the past year. United's transfer business, while slower recently, has already reshaped huge parts of the team Rashford left behind. He isn't returning to the same dressing room he was frozen out of. He's returning to something being rebuilt from the ground up, which, in its own way, might make it easier for everyone to simply move forward rather than relitigate the past. Supporters, for their part, seem split between pragmatism and something close to relief. There's a strand of United fans still frustrated by the version of Rashford who looked disengaged in that final stretch under Amorim, unconvinced that a change of scenery abroad has fundamentally changed anything. But there's a louder strand too. The argument that no replacement United could realistically have signed this summer would offer what a fit, focused, World Cup-tested Rashford offers on his day. Genuine pace in behind, a direct dribble at defenders retreating, and a finishing instinct that, even in his worst spells, rarely fully disappeared. So where does this actually leave Manchester United, and where does it leave Rashford himself? On the pitch, the picture is still forming. Michael Carrick has a squad with genuine depth in wide areas now, and Rashford will have to earn his place rather than assume it. That in itself might be exactly what he needs: competition, not entitlement, is the environment his best football has always come from, his World Cup form suggests. The technical qualities never left. What's being tested now is everything around them: consistency, discipline, and whether the version of Rashford that showed up in Spain travels back across borders as well as his passport did. Off the pitch, there's still a transfer window technically open, and reports connecting him elsewhere in Europe haven't fully disappeared. But every signal from the club, the training reintegration, the involvement in pre-season fixtures, the senior players publicly backing him to stay, points toward Old Trafford being where this next chapter is actually going to be written, not just a stopover before another exit. And maybe that's the most fitting way to think about this whole saga. Marcus Rashford's career has never really followed a straight line. There was the fairy tale breakout as a teenager thrown into a Europa League tie with no warning. There was the England number 9 years, the boyhood dream status, the activism off the pitch that made him a public figure well beyond football. And then there was the full public, painful, and for a long stretch, looking permanent. What's happening now isn't a guaranteed happy ending. Football rarely hands those out on schedule, but it is, unmistakably, a second chance earned in part through form abroad and handed over in part by a market that simply didn't produce another option. Whatever combination of those two forces brought him back through that tunnel. At Carrington this pre-season, the fact remains, 18 months after being told in public by his own manager that he wasn't giving enough, Marcus Rashford is home. What he does with that chance is the only part of this story that hasn't been written yet. If you want to see how this actually plays out, whether Carrick trusts him from the start of the season, whether the Old Trafford crowd gives him the reception the dressing room already has, make sure you're subscribed, because this is a story we're going to keep following all season long. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Rashford deserves this second chance at United, or should the club have let him go for good? Drop your prediction for his goal tally this season below. See you in the next one.